Hi everyone, thank you for joining our webinar today, titled Powering the External Workforce, the Next Generation of Technology. I'm Rishi, Field Marketing Manager, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction to Worksome before we meet our special guests, Brian, Barry, and James. So who are Worksome? Worksome is a home for your external workforce. It was founded in Copenhagen in January 2017 by a team of ex-Google superheroes, and we currently have offices in Copenhagen, which is also our HQ, New York, and London. Why Worksome? Trusted by over 1,500 companies worldwide, Worksome is a new standard in external workforce management, helping you save time and money on your contractor workforce. Worksome clients can benefit from finding, contracting, and paying external workers in one click, optimizing external workforce operations, and insurance-backed worker classification. I'm now going to pass you on to our guests, who will give you a quick introduction before we get started. Also, just to note, please do submit any questions you may have, and we'll try our best to answer. Brian, if you'd like to introduce yourself first, then James and Barry can follow before we get started. Thanks, guys.
Okay, well, fantastic. Brian Pena, Principal Consultant for Defiant Solutions, LLC. We work with enterprises and platform businesses on designing solutions for the next generation of work. I'm super excited to be here. I think that this is a great panel, and honestly, these two are my favorite people in the industry, so I'm excited for the next hour. James, go ahead.
Yeah, James Nichols. I'm VP of Solutions here at Worksome. What that means is I help our major clients solve some of their present issues with their current ecosystems, and also working on solutions for the future for some of the issues and problems and challenges that we're going to talk today.
Cool, and I'm Barry Matthews. I'm the Chief Exec of Open Assembly. In the Worksome were set up by superheroes. We were set up by academics. So we were established in 2018 as part of Harvard University's Laboratory for Innovation Science, who we still work today. And we're an independent research and advisory business. We help enterprises to access talent, typically from freelance marketplaces. So we really specialize in the freelance marketplace side of the external workforce. And as Brian says, yes, two of my favorite people too. So for us, it's just like having a chat and a cup of coffee, but hopefully we can pass on some of our experience.
The only thing missing is the fact that we're all in one place, so we don't have any beers to be drinking while we're doing this. So
exactly. Next time.
Next time.
So should we? I know we're just going to have a sort of free flow conversation. We've got some thoughts to talk about. One of the things I thought might be useful to talk about was just from an external talent perspective, which is what we're here to talk about. How do we power the external workforce and what technology is used? If we start by thinking, well, it's pretty fragmented and complex, right? For large global organizations who hire, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands at times of external workers, managing those workers can be incredibly complex. And for people who are not involved in the industry, it can be quite intimidating because there's so many different options. And if you think about the total workforce of an organization, which consists of course, internal employees, typically the majority will be internal employees managed by HR, but then you will have agencies for contingent work. Many organizations will have a managed service provider, an MSP, who are managing multiple agencies to make it easier for the organization. You'll have direct contracts with freelancers, often in tens of thousands, and you have to manage them all. You'll have outsourcing arrangements, maybe with IT outsourcers or business process outsourcers, and there might be multiple ones of those, and they're probably managed by procurement or a sourcing team. And then you have this new entrant, if you like, the world that I represent, which is these freelance talent marketplaces, of which we track 600. And there are new ones spinning up all of the time. So just managing all of those, and there's probably others that I've missed out, but managing all of those external sources of talent is incredibly complex, and it requires different sourcing systems and background checking systems and security systems, or shipping laptops or providing virtual desktop interfaces. And there are multiple choices to be made there, and there's different invoicing and payment terms and systems. Most organizations will either have some form of, like the managed service provider might do it for them, or they'll have a VMS, a vendor management system, or an FMS, a freelancer management system, and they'll have an ATS, an application tracking system. And you can see how, you've got to learn all the acronyms and work out who does what. Just getting your head around it is incredibly complex. And I think one of the challenges with powering the external workforce is just the sheer complexity, because getting your arms around all of that is hard. And for an organization, it will typically span multiple departments and multiple systems. And so understanding how to optimize all of that, which is generally what most organizations want to do, is a very challenging task. So it's not an easy thing, which we're here to discuss. But what do you guys think about my summary of that complexity? Do you agree that it's a complex Wild West out there?
Very complex, yeah. And as you said, if anything, you've probably dumbed it down a little bit with regards to everything that's included in those ecosystems. I think from Worksome's side, I think what we see is the issues that people face on a day-to-day basis, that comes from that complexity. There are lots and lots of people and lots of organizations that are solving kind of parts of the problem, and that can be anything from sourcing through the entire kind of stack of compliance and onboarding and all of those kind of things, contracting, lots and lots of kind of different systems and different companies talking to each other. And that's where I think clients are starting to get a little bit frustrated, where it's just taking a long time. There's a real kind of lack of visibility of what's going on. I think the complexity comes from not having kind of one source of truth, I guess, having a very clear picture of what you're doing, where you're doing it with. A lot of things happen a long way down the supply chain. So I think I agree totally with you. I think the market and the clients that we work with are telling us all the same things, from onboarding to a lack of visibility to a lack of understanding of data, those kind of things. So yeah, absolutely.
I think one thing that's really interesting is that at the end of the day, the complexity comes with the scale, right? So most of the people who we would say are clients internally within a company are used to just picking up the phone and calling somebody, or just logging onto a website and hiring somebody, whether it's through Upwork, getting a freelancer, or through the local staffing firm when they make a phone call and they happen to go to church with that person on Sundays. So the complexity, completely agree. With the complexity comes with all the different ways of engaging humans, which is incredibly varied and complex. And there are dozens and dozens of ways to do that, and dozens of tools that people can use to do that. But the thing that is the most challenging, all of it, is to really sell the idea of the value of putting these systems, or these complicated systems, in place. So while at the enterprise level, we can all universally agree that having a really defined talent strategy that leverages the best in class and best in breed technology is really important. The job of selling the value of those solutions to the individual is ongoing, and that to me is the real challenge of it. Complexity in and of itself, is solvable, and I'm not afraid of complexity in anything. But I think at the end of the day, the challenge really is in educating the end users who are going to live with those decisions and those systems on the importance of playing ball. Frankly, one of the things that is a key element that is core to every single time I talk to every enterprise or platform is, what are they doing to drive adoption? What are those things that you're doing to address the needs of the individual? Because at the end of the day, these programs exist to put butts in seats and get stuff out the door. And so many people forget that that's why these programs exist. They get really fascinated with their belly button, committed to capturing savings, or really executing on a project and putting another feather in their cap. But to me, what I find fascinating is the consistent evolution of the solutions and the continual reselling of these ideas internally and externally as they grow. Every program you expect it to grow, and one of the challenges of today is, to your point, Barry, these competing solutions are skimming more and more volume away from the traditional programs. So incorporating these newer waves and newer technologies into a program is really a sales job. And I think the selling of those ideas is something that really separates the really competent providers from the ones that are not so confident. How do I say that?
Yeah.
Focusing on the wrong things.
One of the things I always often talk about, and I think would be the sort of nirvana, would be able to manage the total cost of, or to measure and then manage the total cost of work, right? So if you look at internal and external combined, what's the total cost? And then how do you manage the return on work? And if you were able to have a lens over internal and all of those other external sources of supply in one place, you could then make sensible decisions. You could say, well, I'm going to reduce my full-time headcount here, and I'm going to expand my use of external agencies here, or I'm going to reduce my use of external agencies where I pay commission, and I'm going to access these freelance talent marketplaces here for certain tasks. But we don't yet, as an industry, have the standards, the rules, the systems that would enable an organization to do that. The World Economic Forum came out with an interesting report on exactly that, the total cost of work and return on work. I think about a couple of years ago, they did a study with Willis Towers Watson on it, which you'll be able to Google and find, which is really interesting. But it's just, I don't think we as an industry have progressed things that, to the extent where we're able to measure that yet.
I think measuring as a whole, any standards are very difficult. And because you have people who are very focused on cost with, like, for example, highly transactional light industrial environment, as opposed to the ones that are featured, really interested in getting access to the best possible engineer. The thing that is always an interesting kind of conversation when you're talking to a client is, define worker quality to me. What is that? What does quality in a program look like? And that's been incredibly difficult for people to capture at scale, because most of those metrics go back to process efficiencies or something that has to do with speed. So what's a good hire versus the bad hire in a external workforce sort of solution? That's one that is those sorts of standards and those sorts of measurements are one I think will be a holy grail to be able to determine once and for all. James, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of, you kind of touched on it as well. I think a lot of what people is missing is the experience right now. And I think a lot of the kind of future things people are talking about, like, it's not an immediate thing, but how do we put not just the freelancers front and center in the process, but how do you actually put the internal users as well? Like, it will forever remain nameless, but lots of clients have told us that people are working around their internal systems because they just can't use them. It takes too long. Like, you're making really big decisions at a procurement level, maybe, or at a C level about what does this do for your business, but you're forgetting about the people that use it and want to hire, and the people that are kind of coming into your business as well. So I think experience is going to be the future. I mean, not to hark on about it, but every other industry in the world has gone app-based. Every other industry in the world is going real-time demand, real-time supply. And in one of the biggest things that touches everybody's life, we're still kind of stuck with barrier after barrier after barrier after barrier, where the candidate and the hirer are the only people that are important pretty much in this entire process, and they seem to be literally the furthest away that they can be. And after the initial conversation, which probably takes 3 weeks to happen after all the hoops have jumped through, they then have to talk to a bunch of disparate systems. They then have to talk to a bunch of disparate companies. And then by the time they actually enter the enterprise, they've probably forgotten why they were going there anyway. And actually, we've seen with a lot of kind of our big consultancy clients that are acquiring advertising networks, fast-paced kind of consulting, the work's over before you can actually get the person into the business. And I mean, that experience, I'm very definite to say it's not just a candidate experience, it's an internal user experience as well, going back to your adoption point, Brian. So
like, we've digitally transformed so much of business, but we forgot about the talent process, and we haven't focused on the user experience, and we haven't digitally transformed it yet. I mean, James, I can think of lots of examples where we've been trying to help our clients to access talent from marketplaces for a specific project. It might only be, let's say, a 3-week project, and because their business rules and their processes are such that they're trying to treat the freelancer who's doing that project like an employee or like a contractor who's going to be working for multiple months or even years. By the time they've gone through those processes and tried to arrange a panel interview and got a background checking done and screening and what have you, they've come back and said, well, we're now ready. And of course, the freelancer is no longer available because they're just going to go and they've got a job somewhere else, right? It just takes too long. And you could, at the click of a button, have procured that freelancer and started work with them immediately, sent them the requirements, then to do the work back and forth. But it's literally taken longer to get the processes working internally than it would have done to get the project done, because we're trying to use old rules for a new way of working. And I think we've got to update the processes, the guide rails, the standards, the way of working to fit what freelancers want to do.
I think you bring up a really good point there, Barry, which is that at the end of the day, in this new world, we have to really focus on being a client of choice. A lot of the best freelancers have a lot of choice in who they work with. And if a lot of systems get put in place because institutions don't frankly understand how to work with marketplaces and the role, we're going to continue to see lose those candidates, and also say just marketplaces just don't work. And like a great sort of example is the purpose of a marketplace is to collect supply and demand. That's really it. The individual with the demand on the other side. That's the purpose, to eliminate friction and that engagement element. So many companies, when they engage a marketplace, put a staffing contract in front of them with staffing terms and conditions, with staffing insurances and requirements on indemnification of all these other sorts of things. Well, there's nothing inherently bad with that, but the function of the platform is not like a staffing firm. The function of the platform is to facilitate a match, not to be responsible for the engagement or the outcome necessarily. Now, there is a happy middle ground with a lot of really successful programs, but that's just a kind of a small little example of how many existing systems just don't really know how to translate these new solutions into them. From the RFP process, selection process, to the contracting process, to the engagement workflows. The purpose of marketplace is to make that as seamless and as few layers as possible. Unfortunately, major enterprises don't necessarily do that. You'll have a situation where the MSP, the VMS, the payroll provider, the engagement specialist who evaluates, all of these people have a different sort of role to play in a enterprise engagement necessarily. And each of those players put an economic rent on the system. Economic rent in terms of actual physical cost or time cost or process steps or what have you. And it kind of defeats the purpose of marketplace in the beginning. Trying to fit a round peg into a square hole is something many organizations try to do, and many providers try to say they can do, but unfortunately, it just doesn't turn out that way.
Yeah. I think just to focus on marketplaces for a second, the marketplaces are almost in their own worst enemy, in that it's relatively easy to spin up a marketplace and to find workers and then match workers with demand. But there are so many marketplaces that it's incredibly complex. If you are a buyer and you're looking for, I don't know, data scientists, do you look on Upwork or Fiverr or freelancer.com or TopTal or Experfy or any of the others I could continue to reel off? And they're all good, right? But they all offer services in different ways. There's no transparency in the industry yet on who charges the most commission, who's got the best resources, how much money of those resources earned across all of those different platforms, who's got the best experience across those platforms. And so from a buyer's perspective, the user experience is incredibly complicated. They have no idea. And even if they do a big program with one platform, they don't know whether they've got a good deal or not, because they've got no comparison, right? They don't know whether the freelancer is treated well. They don't know whether the freelancer would have rated that platform really well, because that rarely happens. So that lack of standards in our industry across multiple platforms, so freelancers working across all of the platforms that there are, doesn't really exist yet. And I think we really do need that transparency for enterprises to be able to select platforms in the right way. And then the other thing I'd say is that we traditionally, since post-industrial revolution, we think about jobs as jobs. You go to university or not, and then you sign up for a job and you have a profession, and that's the type of job you do. And it's an employment contract, and you get salary and healthcare and what have you. What we're increasingly seeing in the temporary worker, freelance worker, contractor worker, gig economy space is not job roles, it's tasks and activities. I am a data scientist and I can do a data science program for you, and it will take me 3 months or 6 weeks or 2 days, and then I deliver that deliverable to you, and then I go off and do something else, and I might be managing 3 or 4 of those projects at the same time. I'm not looking for a role in your organization. I'm looking to help you to do a task. And that difference between those jobs and roles and tasks and activities, there isn't a translation engine yet. There isn't an ETL, which enables you to go from, well, a project manager is split into these tasks and activities. A project manager could use a freelance talent marketplace to get these tasks and activities done, and in doing so, extend their capacity and capability significantly. But it doesn't really work like that yet. And I think until we've managed to fix that translation of job and role into task and activities, it's still going to remain a confusing place to hire workers and get projects done.
Totally
Guys, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt so we can run a quick poll if that's okay.
Absolutely. Go ahead and run the poll.
So we want to learn, what are your biggest priorities heading into Q4? I'll give it 30 seconds.
I never know what to say when you have a poll posted. Do I comment on it? Do I think that, do I add my own?
I think everyone's going to go all of the above, aren't they?
I would say all of the above. It seems like that's a cheap question.
Well, we're getting some interesting responses. I'll give it another 10 seconds.
I'm curious.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the responses. I'll let you guys carry on.
What would we see the results, by the way?
I'm shivering with anticipation. What was the winner?
So it's quite split. So we have 50% compliance and mitigating risk, 50% cost savings, 25% process enhancement, and then 50% getting access to talent. So it's quite a mixed response to all of the answers.
That's a data point in of itself. I think the fact that there's no cohesive sort of value proposition or thing that's driving urgency, I think in and of itself is a data point. You mentioned a couple of things, Barry, which I really want to expand upon. One is the radical kind of changing in how people choose to manage their careers. There's a great quote by Bill Gross. I want to attribute it to Bill Gross, which is that the smartest people don't work for your company. And the most important strategy, basically, I'm paraphrasing, is to be able to become an attractive place to engage the most different types of people as possible. Instead of having a talent lake where you're hoarding talent and hiring them, you want to be able to have a mechanism to fish from the river of talent and knowledge that is growing. And at the same time, people are choosing to work that way. If, for example, in the States, we have a 90% increase in individuals choosing to, get a federal tax ID year over year, as people are starting their own businesses and they're realizing that they can do more, leveraging different ways of working, side hustling and things like that. But what we are stuck with is enterprises that still exchange time for money. They think about value of an individual in terms of the time that they give as opposed to the value that they create. And that equation, that expectation goes both directions. A lot of people who are freelancers only really know, or independent contractors or people who are working in the external workforce, only know to exchange time for money, an hourly rate, day rate, week rate, month rate, those sorts of things. What they don't necessarily know is how to break that up to bid on a project as opposed that may require more than one person. How do you go about scaling your business? And I think one of the things that we found by working with a lot of these different platforms is they don't really invest in the talent in that way. I think that the focus on the talent and focusing on really differentiating the talent experience leads to better people, better outcomes, and better resourcing. And that's one of the things that I really have liked about some of the stuff coming from working with Worksome is their focus on really bespoke talent experiences and focusing on the hiring manager experience. I think is also a really key differentiator as opposed to, again, getting fascinated with your own belly button.
I think that's quite an interesting point both of you raise, actually. Those data points we've just got highlight something that it's very difficult for a client to buy an entire solution. So they go out to a company to say, MSP, for instance, this problem is now yours. Actually, how you solve this problem is completely up to you. We don't care how you do classifications, don't care how you pay people, don't care what suppliers you use. Ultimately, we as a company have now given this problem to you. And then people are starting to look at parts of the problem. Well, so people, as you can see, people are worried about process enhancements, people are worried about compliance, and that is different people in a different organization not looking at the whole holistic way of hiring freelancers and just thinking, wow, we have a compliance issue. So let's go and find a system or a supplier to plug that gap. Oh, we have various problems around data scientists, brain trust, brilliant. Let's go and get a marketplace to solve that problem. And then suddenly you wake up a year later and you've got all of these people doing a little part of things. So where we need to get to, and this touches on what Barry said, is a lot of what our clients are talking to us is about data and where all the data is. Yeah. So you said it, Brian, people are hiring hundreds of thousands of freelancers a year, but all the data around each one of those hire points disappears somewhere. Like VMSs really exist to just connect you to a bunch of suppliers. Within there, there is no engine to kind of come up with contextual data to say this person has been on the platform before. This person did this person did this before you in another division, this person worked for your Australian counterpart, all of those kind of things that also from a supplier point of view to say, it doesn't tell you that this particular supplier has filled 67% of the last JavaScript development roles. This person is best for data scientists. So it comes back to aggregation, I think, until there's a universal way for people to connect to enterprises and there's a universal way to collect data, because we've done it year after year after year. I mean, there was the first recruitment consultancy, and then there was 200 recruitment consultancies, and then there were the biggest recruitment consultancies in the world, and then there was the smallest niche recruitment consultancies in the world. And they formed into preferred supplier lists, and they've been managed as a group of people, but they haven't been managed in niches. They haven't been managed by the people who need to access them. They've been managed by a separate group that manage them around cost, savings, scale. And actually, all of the information is always around percentages. It's not around what do these people do? Are they right for the role? How do they connect to the users? And a lot of the work that we've done on the supplier front, talking to the biggest recruitment agencies down to the smallest niche one, is they always talk about being connected to the right roles and being connected to the person that's hiring. They all, even it really surprised me with the biggest people that are supplying 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people to the biggest consultancies. Their biggest thing is they don't ever get to talk to the person that needs it, and they feel that would save them time. It would add conversion rates. It would save money. Yeah, if every supplier knew that they were one of three or one of two, that's another thing that's come from the marketplace. They don't want to be one of 67 suppliers. They want to be used for their own specific skills and have the person that needs them on that marketplace. So I think that's something that Worksome is trying to do. I think it's about powering this space rather than taking over this space. It's sitting behind things and saying, look, it doesn't matter who you are as a supplier. Here's a universal way of entering the enterprise. You don't have to worry about compliance. You don't have to worry about identity checks. You don't have to worry about contracting. You don't have to worry about rates, all of those things. How can we give you, we don't want to be another barrier, if you know what I mean. The market does not need another barrier in the way of the supplier, the candidate, and the user. Like somehow we've got to find a way to put those three in a real-time conversation with everything that flows things out just happening invisibly in the background. People don't have to worry about it. That's why I think that's where technology comes in, really, is to not to get in the way of that age-old recruiter, candidate, and user relationship, but to sit around it and make that the only thing those three people have to worry about. Everything else just happens automatically in the background and is taken care of. So that's very much where we sit. It's not impossible, but it's not going to happen in the next 30 minutes. But
that's James. That is where I see you guys sitting, and I think we don't need a single system. There's always going to be multiple systems, multiple ways of hiring external talent. What we do need is an air traffic control. We need a control panel where you really can see the different sources of talent supply and how you as an organization are managing those different sources of talent supply. And I do see that's where Worksome can play a really important role, because where I started saying there are agencies and MSPs and direct sourcing, and then there are marketplaces. If Worksome can provide a window on all of those different types of talent sources, And then you're able to say, well, yeah, this was time to hire for this one was X, commission I'm paying here was Y, you know, and you provide that safety net that background checking's been done, compliance is done, you're indemnifying against IR35, you're providing that safety net, you've got it all in one place. That really is, I think, super important for most of the enterprises we talk to. And if you know, I know we didn't get well, we did actually, I think, get the results of that poll, but I've not seen it. But you know, if cost reduction was there, reduction of risk was there, access to talent was there, you are solving those priorities that the customers have. So I do think Worksome have an important role to play. I hope you live up to this now. I'm building you up. You have a great opportunity here to provide that digital center of excellence for contingent, or you know, for freelance or non-employed labor. I think is a great opportunity.
Sorry to interrupt again. It's a good time to actually ask one of the questions that's come in. So the question is, how does Worksome work together with other talent technology a company may be using?
Ostensibly, we're agnostic, and that's what we're trying to be. What we're trying to be is the universal entry. So what usually happens at the moment is any enterprise will push liability to an MSP, whether it's for hiring people, for background checking, for paying people. That then gets pushed into a VMS. It then gets pushed to a supplier. The supplier might push that to an umbrella company. Somewhere in there will be an IR35 system. Somewhere in there will be identity background checking company. And what we're finding is, adding international as well. One of our clients was saying we had 6 people in the layer, but then we needed to hire someone from India working in the US that had to go through a local partner who had to push it to an Indian-based payroll. So we had 8 people in the chain. And even the suppliers have said this, like, what we try to do is give visibility to everybody working within the supply chain. At the moment, everything's invisible. Once everything has gone into the VMS, suppliers are looking after contracts, suppliers are looking after background checking. So ultimately, we're looking to connect everything. Barry touched on it before. You've got 100, 200, 600 marketplaces. Each one of those has a perfect way of working with the client, but they can't actually access the client because they all need a universal way of doing that. So what we're trying to be is a software, for the want of another word, is we're collapsing the supply chain. So we are taking responsibility for contracts, we're taking responsibility for background checking, we have IR35 classification engines built into the platform. That all happens in real time, that all happens in the briefing process. So it gives everyone visibility. So it gives suppliers visibility over things like, when are the briefs actually approved? When can we actually supply people? When are interviews going to happen? They're talking in real time to the hiring managers as well. So instead of it going through many steps to get feedback, you're talking to the person that's going to hire. And we're handling payments as well, and that's kind of internationally as well. So what I would say is we're trying to get back to talent agencies supplying talent, actually, and their main focus being finding excellent people for this platform, whilst we just take care of all of that stuff that is weighing recruiters down and weighing suppliers down, and actually is weighing the whole process down, for one another way, because there's so many barriers and so many steps. It's taking 6-7 weeks to get someone on site. So we're staying completely agnostic. We want to work with marketplaces, we want to work with large recruiters, small recruiters, niche recruiters, direct sourcing, everything really. As Barry said, we want to be the kind of window into it. And actually, I think also from a talent agency perspective, unless you're a very, very big Manpower or someone like that, you don't have the payroll to pay 1,000 freelancers, right? You probably don't have the infrastructure to be able to work with a Facebook, because they are looking for an Allegiance or something like that to handle the kind of scale. So what we can do on behalf of recruiters, big and small, is take care of that contractual side of things. They don't have to chase POs, they don't have to chase timesheets, they don't have to pay people, really. All they can do is kind of work into Worksome when we sort out all of that at scale. So long-winded answer to a very simple question is we're looking to work with everybody that supplies an enterprise, but make it a level playing field. If you're a big client, if you're a big recruitment agency, middle-sized recruitment agency, small, or a marketplace, you all access the enterprise in exactly the same way.
I think one thing I want to say to compliment and also push back on a little some. you know, there are 600 or 1,000 or so marketplaces. I don't think they all do whatever they do perfectly. I think the challenge is finding the 300 that do it well, right? I think that finding the definite 300 do it well. Others are just have a really weak front end and are a really cool front end and have no real anything behind it, no talent behind it. So the selection process is actually something that I think a lot of companies just don't know how to do. The thing that kind of comes to mind is you know, information and data is not wisdom. Just giving people information, showing them data does not necessarily tell them what to do with it. And so I think that the balance that we need to find is, you know, what is the role of technology versus service in helping people kind of build this next sort of generation? And how do you, you know, you bring technology and technology enables, obviously it's a requirement, it's a backbone of any program, but how do you teach people how to use it? And how does information make a difference at the point of decision where somebody has to make a choice? I'm going to pick this individual through this channel, pay this rate for this long, is we engage in this manner. Each of those steps is a decision criteria. And how do we influence each of those at the enterprise level is what breeds some of the complexity that Barry references, because people have a preference. And you know, you need to make sure that you educate people on how to do that. But I guess the question for both of you is, how do you determine what should be a service layer and what should be resolved through appropriately scoped technology? What is the role of the providers in that?
I think you'd ideally you're trying to take the manual effort out of the process, aren't you? You're trying to digitize the process end to end if you can. And of course, it's not entirely possible yet. There's still lots of things that we have to get humans to do through the entire hiring process. But I do think, and just to come back to James's point for a second, I think the way Worksome works with other technologies, and I think does a really good job, is I don't see Worksome as instead of. I see Worksome as well as. And I think what Worksome have done is created a really good user experience, like digitally transformed the user experience. So it's quite sexy to use Worksome. It's a nice, easy to use interface. The other thing that I think you've done, which is quite provocative, is you've created transparency. And in a world that's been dominated by MSPs, which are, you know, by far and away the biggest providers of temporary work, when you think about, well, what's an MSP done? An MSP has made it really simple for big enterprises to manage multiple complicated agencies. They charge a standard rate and then they obscure the amount that each of the individual agencies underneath the MSP are charging, right? And for what Worksome do is expose all of that. And of course, that's quite provocative from an MSP's perspective. They don't like that because that's disrupting their business model. But what it enables the client to do is to reduce costs of MSP over time and have a digital interface to those individual agencies. And then the third thing I think that you're able to do for multiple different types of talent sourcing is to remove the blockers, to put the hiring manager, whoever that manager is, or the hiring person, in direct touch with the talent, safe in the knowledge that there's a safety net around compliance and background checking and IR35 indemnity and all of that side of things. So I see you as well as, which might sound expensive, but it actually is not, because you're reducing the cost of all of the other things that you've got. But it does require transparency. And so as you increase your access to marketplaces through Worksome, which we'll hopefully help you to do, those marketplaces will need to show transparency. You'll need to know what Upwork charges versus freelancer.com versus all of the other ones I mentioned. You need to understand what commission they're charging. You need to understand the volumes, etc., because that's what you're enabling, is that transparency across any talent source.
Well, I think James said it pretty well, which I like the notion of powered by, which is definitely the operating system that powers the future workforce. I think there's a really neat little sort of angle to that I really appreciate. And I think the thing you referenced, Barry, is just really good old supplier management. I think that the information asymmetry, where one party has more information than another, that leads to a lot of the problems you're talking about, and that's usually resolved through good old-fashioned sourcing and procurement, which I know you know as well as I do. And that part of that is knowing the cost inputs and bringing some of those disciplines to something that's really been the Wild West. A lot of these platforms have really thrived doing one-on-one as opposed to one-to-many. And as to get to that next level, they have to learn how to do that, and do that and question some of the pricing mechanisms. For example, many platforms charge workers to participate. Many enterprises have ESG policies that specifically preclude that. charging candidates, and that's also illegal in some states specifically, or some countries. That sort of stuff is the sort of stuff that comes with the transparency that Worksome provides. You know, and I think the thing again to me is back to this notion of how do we influence behavior and decisions at the point of action, and that comes from, to your point, that transparency, and also having guidelines and rules, and that's part of what makes some solutions again like Worksome much different than others.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're almost at the end of our time.
I'm sorry, I've just got one more question. So we've got the perfect question to start wrapping up. The question is, going into the next quarter and really next year, what will be key to contingent work program success? So if we could start wrapping up on that question, that'd be great.
James?
Oh, God, where do you start with that one? I'd actually say I'd take a broad stroke and say understanding. Actually, I would say Barry opened with it, and I would say anybody that is in procurement, anybody that is looking for a solution or something new, challenge yourself and go outside of the norm. Yeah, it's very easy to say we've had an MSP for 10 years. It's coming to the end of its contract. Let's go and look at another 3 MSPs. You'll have some wonderful sales pitches. It'll all be promised to be different, and you'll end up with exactly the same thing for the next 2 years. So I would say talk to people like Barry. You know, talk to people like Brian. You don't have to talk to Worksome, but talk to independent people that can come into your business and say, look, here are your actual problems. It's been proved over the last 30 years that one size fits all solves 60% of the problems, but it leaves some very serious problems within the 40%. And unless you look for a way to kind of start and change, I think one of the fears is the sheer scale of it. It's like, how do you change something so big and so embedded in your company to something completely different? And actually that gets into a whole other conversation around a bottle of wine about people that have outsourced everything for 20 years suddenly having to do it themselves. That's a very different, very difficult transition. So I would say it's understanding. I would say there's still a lack of understanding about the options, the actual issues that are trying to be solved here. And I would see that if you have a business unit, if you have a division, if you have a country, if you have a company you've acquired that's slightly different, look at piloting something or some of the companies directly with marketplaces, with someone like Worksome, with someone like Barry, with someone like Brian. I mean, try something small and see whether it solves the problems, and then it's easy to scale that from there. So that would be my thing. Understanding. Go and find out what's out there.
Yeah, love it. Try something new, because I think it's easy to say consolidation and get your arms around your contingent worker program, but I think trying something new right now is really good advice. This is a huge industry. It's a $1.5 trillion industry. We got 500 million professionals in it and about 1,000 different platforms. Try something new. In our organization, we have a monthly stipend for all of our people to use marketplaces, and a different marketplace every month. Try it. You'll be amazed what you find, and it's a sort of fail fast. It's relatively low risk. Try something, you will be amazed what you can achieve. You try something different. Take yourself out of your comfort zone and try accessing talent from a new source.
I think the biggest thing for me is really twofold, which is, one, don't be afraid to swing to the fences, because now is the best time to prove your relevance and the value to your organization, and do something truly unique and different. And we've all struggled to kind of find our balance and our way in the world, and we want to do something great. Why else would you be working? Hopefully, I like to leave a legacy in every organization I'm a part of. This is your chance to do that. HR and procurement have always struggled for a seat at the table when it comes to C-level and strategic decisions. Now is the time, for the first time in history, where the focus on talent is at the highest levels of our organization. So being able to build a perspective that's unique to yours and deliver something that's unique and different, that leaves your stamp on the organization, is going to be something that's going to really alter the trajectory of your career. And then to both the James and Barry's point, now is the time to be curious. Curiosity is the most powerful force in the universe, and it's a source of every single major change in human history. And now is the time to be curious about, what's the better way to get this done? How can I do this better? What is the better solution? There's got to be a better way to do this. And thinking in those terms for the next 3 months, and get in the habit of thinking that really for the rest of your career is going to make the difference. So I think the biggest thing is swing for the fences and don't be afraid to be curious.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you so much, guys. The conversation's been awesome, and I wish we could keep going all day. Just want to say thank you, a big thank you to Brian, Barry, James, and everyone who's shown an interest in this webinar. If you do have any further questions or about anything you've learned today, then please get in touch or visit us on worksome.com. And finally, before we go, I just want to make everyone aware about our attendance at the CWS Summit in Dallas next week. If you are attending, then please do pop by and say hello to our team at Kiosk G, where James, Claudia, and Sam will be representing Worksome. I hope to see you there. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
For fun.
Thank you.